Hi there, welcome to the technical introduction for the Watson Process Automation Assistant Accelerator. Today, I'm going to talk to you about getting started with this particular accelerator. This is one of the more technically heavy applications to get started with because it requires integrations with multiple external services. So before we get started, I want to be clear who should proceed with this video and who should simply use the one that we already have deployed to the IBM-Watson-WPAA Slack team. We have a version that's already deployed there, and it's listed under the username Watson-SF, and that is a fully functional version of this application. So I recommend simply using that particular Slack team, joining it, and messaging that bot if you need to demo this without any customizations. But if for whatever reason, maybe you need to deploy this to a different Slack team, maybe you need to make a few customizations to the actual chatbot itself, or maybe you need to make modifications to make a point to a custom Salesforce database. So if you need to make those type of customizations, then this video is for you, and I will show you how to configure this. But if you simply just need to demonstrate it, I recommend using the version of this application that we already have deployed. So before we get into it, I want to show you how to access that version that's already deployed. It's pretty simple. You go to the Watson Process Automation Assistant page on the Watson Accelerator portal. We can click Access here, and it'll take us to an inviter page for that particular Slack team. You enter your email address, you'll get an invite to join that team, and you'll be able to message Watson-SF there. So that's the easy way. Here's the inviter screen. But let's now talk about configuring the application if you need to customize it. So we're going to start assuming that you have downloaded the application, and you've extracted it to your hard drive, and you have it available. So right now I have it open in my editor, which is Atom, and this is a node-based application. So the very first thing that we need to do with new node-based applications is we need to install our dependencies. In this case, we can do that by issuing the npm install command, as I already have written over here. So again, just issue npm install, and that will go ahead and install the dependencies for this application. So the next step that we need to do is we need to commission a runtime environment on Bluemix. And the reason why I want us to do this right away is because Slack needs a way to communicate with this application. So if we want to run this app locally, Slack doesn't natively have a way to send a message to your local computer. There are ways to get around that, and I'll talk about that at the end, but by far the easiest way to get your application up and running is to deploy it to Bluemix. So if you deploy it to Bluemix, then that will be accessible from Slack's server. So let's go ahead and let's create a new node runtime on Bluemix. So in this case, I've already gone ahead and I've created an application for us. I called 9WPAA Salesforce, but you create yours and call it whatever you want. So you create your application, and the next thing we need to do is we need to create a conversation instance to connect to it. So you can either click Connect New or Connect Existing if you already have the conversation instance. But we'll say you click Connect New, and you'll be able to actually commission that instance of conversation. So skipping forward just a little bit, once you've created that connected conversation instance, the next thing that we need to do is we need to get the VCAP information for your conversation instance. And so if you click on Connections, it'll take you to this page. It shows all the connections to your application, all the VCAP connections. Click on View Credentials. You'll be presented with a JSON object that describes the connection to Conversation WPAA, or whatever you call your conversation instance. So this is simply an easy way to manage these connections, and that way when you deploy to Bluemix, it will automatically pick up this information. So we're going to go ahead and simulate having access to this VCAP service on our local machine. And also configure the environment variables so that they point to the correct values here. So if we go ahead and go back into our files, what I recommend doing is taking your VCAP service and pasting it into a file called vcaplocal.json. And what you'll end up getting when you copy those VCAP credentials, you'll get in JSON object that looks like this. You'd say the name of the service, name of the service type, I should say, which is conversation. And it also have the name of the actual instance of that service. In my case, it's conversation-WPAA. It'll also be a username and a password right there. So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to configure our environment variables. So if we go ahead and configure or open up our environment variables.json file inside of our configuration directory, we see that there is a file called env-vars.json. And this is the file that tells the application where to look for certain environment configuration values. So there's two ways to enter information into this. One, you can literally enter the string and it will pull that value and make it available to you. Or alternatively, you can specify it as a VCAP expression and it will go ahead and try to find the corresponding value from VCAP services. So if we're running this locally, it will default to the values that are in VCAP local. But since we're deploying it to Bluemix, we just need to tell it where to look when we deploy it to Bluemix. And so the values that we need to change, first we need to change which service we're talking about. So in this case, if you remember our VCAP service JSON object, we have a name of our instance here, which is conversation WPAA in my case. But you will put whatever value that you see there as the expression, which tells it which value in the array of VCAP services to find. So in this case, it will pull the VCAP service that has the name conversation WPAA, and we'll use that as the base to execute an expression on. So the next thing that's specified here is the field. You won't have to change anything here because we're using the standard VCAP file. But what this says is it's going to pull the credentials.url from your VCAP service. It also pull the credentials.username and credentials.password for these two versions, or these two values rather. And additionally, for the API URL, there's an append property. And the append simply just appends that value to the end of the value that this expression returns. So in this case, what we need to do to set up our conversation instances, we'll need to actually go ahead and specify our workspace ID and also a version. So what I recommend doing is just grabbing the latest version, which is not this, but recommend grabbing that latest version from your instance of conversation. But the next thing we need to do is we need to grab the workspace ID. So I'm going to go back into our Bluemix description here. And if we go ahead and we open up this instance of conversation, we will first need to bring in an export of our conversation. And then once you bring in that export, we'll have the ability to get the actual workspace ID from that, and then we'll supply that into our environment variables.json file. So what I'm going to do is show you where to find the export of our conversation workspace. So if you want to use the conversation workspace that is deployed to the application that's running on IBM Watson WPAA Slack team, you can use this conversation extract as a base. It's available in config/conversation.json. So if we go ahead and take that file and we go ahead and launch the tooling, there'll be an ability to import that file. I'm not going to do it right now, but you can import that file and then you'll have available to you the workspace ID. We'll take that workspace ID and then plug it directly into our environment variables.json file in the conversation API URL value. Okay, So that's all that has to be done with respect to Watson Conversation, Watson Conversation and our Bluemix application. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to start to configure Slack. In order to configure Slack, first we need to create a new Slack application, and then we need to go ahead and make some configuration to that application. So in order to commission a new application on Slack, you'll need to go ahead and pull up the Slack Developer Console, which is available at api.slack.com, and you'll be able to create an application using your apps over here, and then ultimately you can get to your own application. In this case, I have an application called Watson Salesforce-Local. But if you get to this page where you start to configure the details about your application, I'll show you the values that you need to pay attention to. So the first value you need to pay attention to when you create your new application is you need to pay attention to the verification token. And this verification token is useful because it confirms that the message is originating from your app in Slack. So all that happens with this is it's included in messages that come in from Slack that basically says, this is just proof that this originated from Slack. So you know that it originated from Slack, and not only did it originate from Slack, it originated from the correct Slack application. So you need to take this verification token, and you need to place that in two places. So you'll take that, and you will put it first in your environment variables.json file under Slack verification token. And then if you want to go ahead and open up the file down here called manifest.yml.example. First, well, let's actually go ahead and modify manifest.yml.example. So what you have with manifest.yml.example is a blank slate with just the variables that you need to configure. So we'll go ahead and we'll take that value and we'll supply it to Slack verification token here. So I'm not actually going to enter it, but I'll enter it with a space, and then I'd enter the name of the token value here. So once I have that in there, now's a good time to just talk about what this file is. So this file is our, I'm going to read it back in so I know that I have it. This is our manifest.yml.example file, and we want to go ahead and save as for this file and create a copy of it called simply manifest.yml. And what this is it's instructions on how to deploy the Bluemix. Certain values for environment variables that should be included, as well as the name of our application that should be registered as a Bluemix route. So in this case, what we should do is change the name of this manifest.yml file to be the name of the application that you just created earlier. So change both the name and the host to that value, and then we'll start to fill out these values under the env part of the YML file. So what happens in this particular section is these are the values to populate as environment variables. So if we need to make a change to our application, we can make these changes to these environment variables without having to redeploy the application. But anyway, we'll go ahead and we'll fill out both our manifest.yml file and our env vars file at the same time. So the first thing we did was we got that verification token. That's available again at the basic information page for our Slack application. If we move on from there and we go ahead and we look at our OAuth and permissions tab, this is where we get some other critical information. Particularly, there's a value in here called the bot user OAuth access token. So we'll take that value and we'll put it into Slack API key. And again, we'll duplicate that change in our env vars file. So those pieces of information, the Slack API key and the Slack verification token, are sufficient information so that we can start to receive messages from Slack, and we also can start to send messages on behalf of the bot user. But we still need to make a few more changes in order to actually go ahead and do those things. So if we go back to the Slack Developer Console here, we will need to go ahead and give it permission to send messages as our bot. So in order to do that, we'll need to go ahead and add the permission called chat write bot. So So we can do that and save the changes. So just make sure that your bot has permission to actually write messages, which again is specified by the chat write bot permission. Okay, the next tab, the event subscriptions. So we'll need to enable events so that we can receive notification that a user has sent a message to our chatbot. And how we do this, we basically expose an API that will receive messages that are sent kind of like a webhook through Slack. So when we ultimately deploy our application, we'll do this at the very last step because we need to actually have an application out here to receive the event. We'll need to go ahead and once we deploy the application again, I can't do it now. Well, I can do it now because I already have it set up, but you won't be able to work with it until you can receive these events. And you can only receive events once you have deployed your application. So maybe it would be best if I came back to this at the end. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that because we need to have the application deployed in order to configure this particular page. And actually likewise with the rest of the pages on this Slack configuration. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on temporarily to the Salesforce configuration. And the Salesforce configuration will be quick because all we need to do is plug in two values on it, our Salesforce username and our Salesforce password plus security token. So the way that the Salesforce password works is you have your password which you registered into your Salesforce account, ideally as an administrator in order to use this application. And then you would say my password, and then immediately after your password, you go ahead and you enter your security token, which is generated for you on Salesforce. And in order to generate that security token, you can go ahead and go into your Salesforce Developer Console, and go to View Profile, and ultimately get to your settings. From your settings, there's a tab here called Reset My Security Token. And if you follow the instructions on that, that will give you access to a new value for a security token, which you should save and kind of keep private because it is part of the way into getting into your Salesforce account. So again, these two values, your Salesforce username and your Salesforce password, immediately followed by the Salesforce security token. So when we have all those values filled out, and again, now at this point in our application, we've now filled out Slack API key, Slack verification token, Slack API endpoint already came configured, Salesforce password, and Salesforce username. And additionally, we've already configured our conversation our conversation API credentials to use a VCAP service to pull those values. We are now ready to deploy the application. So before we do that, I want to just make sure that we've done our due diligence and filled out both the environment variable.json file and our manifest.yml file. So again, remember, we started from a manifest.yml.example. We're going to save as, so we have a file called manifest.yml, and that will include all of these values. And you'll notice on this that there are no values for conversation API URL, conversation API username, conversation API password. And that's because we actually don't need to specify them as environment variables because we specify them as a VCAP expression. So what's going to happen is once the application is deployed, it's going to attempt to infer those values simply based on the connected instance of Watson conversation, which is why that was the first step we did. So we now already had it connected. So ideally when we deploy, the application will be good to go from the start. And how we deploy, if we have a file called manifest.yml available at project root, we'll simply issue Bluemix login first, if you haven't logged into Bluemix, which will ask you for your username and password, and then you'll specify a organization and a space. Or if you've already logged into Bluemix, you can simply change to your target, or targets. So I've issued the Bluemix target command. And then if you want to specify an organization, it's -O, my org name. And then if you want to issue your space, it's -S, my space name. And you issue that command, that will go ahead and point the Bluemix CLI to the location we want to install the application to, which is already, it should be the place where you created your new node runtime. The next thing we need to do is we need to actually push the application to it, which is by issuing a CF push. If you issue a CF push and you have a file called manifest.yml, it should pick up the values from that. But if you have your manifest file named something different, issue with the -F flag and issue the name of your manifest file. So in this case, I'll just call it manifest.yml.active, just because that's what I called mine. So issue either the bare CF push command or CF push command and specify a manifest file, which will then go ahead and deploy your application to Bluemix. So again, we've now taken care of this. We have deployed an application to Bluemix. Let's go ahead and go back to our Slack developer console and finish up the settings that we need to configure. So what we need to configure from Slack is we need to tell it where to listen, or we need to tell Slack where to send its events when they come in and which events to send. So we'll go ahead and we'll turn events on, and now we'll issue the, we'll tell it to expect events to arrive at our Bluemix route. So it'll be something like, in my case where it was called WPAA-Salesforce, it would be https://wpaa-salesforce.mybluemix.net, and then the path, which is /API//Slack/incoming E event. And it's important that you specify that correctly. It will tell you if it's verified, and if you specify it incorrectly, it simply won't let you continue. It will tell you that it did not receive the correct response. But if you do specify it correctly, and again, the application by default is listening at the path API/incoming event, so simply put your Bluemix route /API//incoming event, and you'll be able to receive events from Slack. So the next thing we need to do is we need to tell it which events to receive. And in order to do that, all this application needs is the message.im permission. So go ahead and add the bot user event. Important to add the bot user event, not the team event. Team event's something different. So we'll subscribe to the bot event, add bot user event, message.im, which corresponds to the events that originate when a direct message is sent to the Slack bot. So that's how to configure the event subscriptions. We likewise have to configure interactive messages. So interactive messages are a way to add buttons and kind of cool little ways for the user to interact with the bot. And there are a few interactive prompts on this chatbot. So we need to tell Slack where to send the information it gets when an interactive message is interacted with. And it's done the same way. So again, specify your Bluemix host, your Bluemix route, /API//Slack/interactive M messages. This will receive the information about these interactive messages and allow a user to actually interact with the chatbot through interactive messages. So this one does not let you know if you've entered it correctly. So be very, very careful when you're entering it. Make sure that you're going to the path /API//Slack/interactive messages. Make sure things are spelled right. Otherwise, your interactive messages will throw an error. So with that configured, you can go ahead and click Save Changes, and then our application should be good to go. We should be able to interact with the bot in our organization, or our Slack team, with the bot user. Actually, there's actually one more configuration I failed to mention, and that's actually the bot user configuration. So sorry to get ahead of myself, but the bot user page is where you actually specify the name of the bot that you want users to interact with. So this is basically the front end for your chatbot. In this case, mine is specified as Watson-SF local. If I want to make my bot online, I go ahead and say move this to on. I say save changes, and then users will interact with the bot through this chatbot, through this username. So if we just go ahead and take a look in Slack here, I'll pull it over. I've actually deployed, I have two versions of this running. I have Watson-SF, which is the one that I run on Linux, and then there's Watson-SF local, which points to my local machine. But that's how I interact with bot, and that corresponds directly to the value that we specified here. So with all of those things specified, the application should be ready to go, again, on your Slack team and accessible at the username that you specify here. You should be able to interact with the bot starting immediately. Now, a side note is we had to deploy this application to Bluemix, but if you are doing development work on this application, it may not be convenient for you to push changes to Bluemix in order to interact with the bot. And that's why you need to, if you do need to run this application locally, you need to get a little bit creative and make it so that Slack can communicate to your computer that you're running this on. And if you want to do that, I recommend using a tool called ngrok. I'm not going to describe too much about it, but it's basically it sets up a tunnel that's accessible externally, and it will tunnel those requests that come in to that URL which it exposes for you. It'll tunnel those requests directly to your computer. So in that way, basically, you can tell Slack to go Slack to our ngrok tunnel to our local machine. And you actually can see that I have it set up to use one of my ngrok URLs here. So that's how I test this application locally. And a side note too, if you do need to start up your application locally, it's a standard node starting procedure. You simply issue npm start, and your application will start locally. So with that said, that shows how to configure the application, how to get all the Salesforce information, how to configure your Slack application, how to configure Bluemix, how to deploy your application, how to set up a tunnel so that you can work with your application locally. And basically, it should give you everything you need to configure in order to get started with this particular accelerator. Thank you. Have a good day.